This is the second part in a two-part series on Game of Thrones' final season. Click the link above to catch up on part 1. Much like previous seasons of Game of Thrones, the penultimate episode in Season 8 marks the climax of the season and its plot threads. The events in this episode not only culminate this season of television, but also the overarching themes and character arcs that define Game of Thrones. This episode is the big game, the final maneuver, the last step in this show's chaotic climb. We've had many big moments on this road, from Baelor, the Reigns of Castamere, the Children, Mother's Mercy, to the Winds of Winter, and now we finally have the Bells. Now, all of these episodes are really good at distilling the storylines of their entire seasons into shocking and purposeful moments. This episode is no exception, with a tidal wave moment that reframes the entire history of the show. For many, this moment did not reframe the show for the better. Whether it be mishandled or misguided, this episode did not stir its audience in the way the showrunners intended. From the lowest Rotten Tomatoes score in the show's history, to a mountain of breakdowns on YouTube, this episode has received its fair share of criticism. This is why I'm beginning my analysis by focusing on what this episode does right. And that's a lot. Seriously, of the behemoth episodes that ended the show, this was easily my favorite. Of all the elements in this episode I consider to be praiseworthy, the strongest would be how the action is framed around the titular bells. One of the elements I criticized in my previous episode was the lack of established or compelling expectations that the battle could then subvert, but in this episode, the difference is literally night and day. Instead of having a bunch of characters who join the battle just to fight, each character enters King's Landing with a specific mission that they must carry out. Arya and Jaime both have missions centered around Cersei, one to kill, the other to save, so immediately we have competing trajectories with the potential to cross paths. These two missions in particular are built out of character knowledge and expectations. Arya thinks this is going to be a long and grueling siege, so she wants to end it quickly as well as satisfy her death list. Jaime is given a plan by his brother and races against the clock to save what he can. All of these plans are built out of a desire for de-escalation, even if they can't agree on who gets to live. Tyrion's plan, the one at the center of this episode, boldly aims to save as many people as possible.
If the city surrenders, they will ring the bells and raise the gates. Please, if you hear them ringing the bells, call off the attack.
Tyrion in this episode is the best he's been in seasons, gambling his life on this mission by putting his trust in Davos and Jon. His big bet is sending Jaime into King's Landing to ensure the bells are run and maybe give his family a fighting chance. It is both smart and naively optimistic. The plan represents his values and growth over the series. Overall, the battle is given a ton of weight through the characters and staging. Like with Jaime once again trying to save King's Landing and also save Cersei, each character's trajectory is linked to what matters to them. These trajectories are also helped by some really clear geography. The city is given a circular shape, which we clearly see from Cersei's point of view, and the battle is given clear geographical landmarks such as the Outer Rim of Scorpions, the Bell Tower, and Cersei's Red Keep on the far end. Before the battle starts, we get 5 crucial minutes of table setting that link characters to landmarks and these landmarks to each other. On the ground, we link Jaime, Arya, and the Hound to the gates and the bell tower, while they're crowded alongside King's Landing citizens, the stakes for this entire conflict. The episode overall has a strong forward momentum of characters on fixed paths for the quickest route to peace. The action here takes a back seat to the drama between the characters. Never indulged in at first, a necessary thing to happen to get the pieces where they need to go. The action is almost too quick, the checkmate obtained too easily. The defenses fall, the bells are run, and the armies are there to hear it. But this is Game of Thrones. Peace ain't happening today. Every great battle scene revolves around actions and reactions, and here, the two are divided by the bells ringing the Lannisters' defeat. Following their queen's command, the Northern Unsullied and Dothraki armies bring upon a gruesome massacre that I dare not show on YouTube in fear of being demonetized. It is a complete shift from the first half of the battle, from order to chaos, from restraint to indulgence. We get large reactions from Jon and Davos, both up close and from afar. At first, Jon resists this violence, but to survive, he must succumb to the flow of the battle. Every initial battle plan going into this siege is thrown out the window once Daenerys makes her move. One of the more touching moments in this season is the Hound urging Arya to retreat, telling her that carrying out this plan will be her death.
And look at me. Look at me!
The Hound and the world crumbling around her are reflections of violence, and she makes the choice within this battle to leave that behind. As a deconstruction of violence, this episode does a pretty stellar job at condemning the war that has run the entirety of this series. This is largely due to the subjective lenses that carry us through the battle. From Jon hopelessly trying to maintain order amongst his men, to Grey Worm mindlessly killing the Lannister soldiers, each act of violence makes sure to emphasize the terror they create and the emotion that drives them. Towards the end, we feel the full force of Drogon's fire as we follow Arya desperately trying to survive through these long tracking shots that fully immerse us in the scene. We, the audience, are trapped with her as she is bombarded left, right, and center by debris, fire, and smoke. It's certainly a technical marvel. The battle even pulls a Joss Whedon, following a mother and her child before and during the battle. Arya notices them at the gates, then she tries to save them when Daenerys brings her wrath. My favorite shot of the entire episode is when Arya attempts to help the child and now injured mother off the ground as the impending doom of Drogon lurks in the distance, inching closer and closer until his flames fill up the entire screen. Everything about this battle is designed for maximum terror and impact, as characters form plans that go horribly wrong, and attempts at peace are crushed in their path. Even Cersei, one of the more conniving villains in this series' run, is shown empathetically in her final moments. She doesn't create more destruction or despair, instead she clings to the life and love she has left.
I want our baby to live.
As Cersei is shown sympathetically, so are her soldiers, who do heroic things and are humanized by their open helmets that reveal their scared faces. The intentions of this episode couldn't be any clearer, that this is the price of Daenerys' conquest. Does everything work in this battle? Hell no. While the bits in the city are great, the individual one-on-one fights range from dumb to really dumb. I mean, this is just pandering fanservice that adds nothing of substance to the macro story being told. But even with these hiccups, taken at face value, this is as effective as Daenerys' turn can get. And that's all this battle is. Effective. Everyone at home certainly felt pain, whether it was from the characters or the showrunners. With everything this episode brings, the spectacle, the turns, the deaths, and the emotions, I'm still left with one burning question. All criticism and analysis boils down to one question. Why? Why this shot? Why this sound? Why this decision? During the season of Thrones, many fans were asking similar critical questions. Why is this season only 6 episodes long? Why are the characters making these really dumb decisions? Why is Daenerys no longer Daenerys? I don't think myself nor any of us have the answers to these questions, but we can think about the impact these decisions have on the story. The big why that I kept pondering after this episode aired was, why did this battle not focus on Daenerys? Don't get me wrong, the scene is very much about Daenerys. Her decision and actions are felt with full force by the characters we track in this battle. However, not once do we track Daenerys through this turn. This all goes back to the impact this scene tries to create. The scene wants us to feel heartbroken by her turn. Because of this, the scene emphasizes the point of view of every character who opposes her or inadvertently gets in her way. Her presence and emotional turn is a twist that spirals everyone into chaos, from which there's no return. But in this approach, they forgot the most important detail, and that's the why. Tracking the emotions and behavior of a character might as well be the most important thing in drama. The best stories succeed in having us understand the essence of its characters, from their strengths, their weaknesses, to their perspectives. If we understand who a character is, and the story can convince us why they think and feel the things they do, then the audience becomes an active participant in their story. We become linked to this character's actions, anticipating and thinking through each step. These characters can surprise us and do things we couldn't predict, but ideally, these surprises make sense in retrospect and inform us of something deeper about the character. This story has never been about people doing bad things. It's about why they do them. And then you get to this moment and... the entire weight of this character, of this story, rests upon the 3-minute scene where Daenerys hears the bells. Kudos to Emilia Clarke, she gives it her all. But even then, I struggle to connect with what her character is thinking and feeling. It doesn't help that she starts and ends the scene as an emotional wreck, This is a wordless moment, so there's no real change in body language to convey to us what she's about to do. Furthermore, the visual language of the scene conveys a showdown between Daenerys and Cersei. Dany keeps her eyes on the Red Keep, not the people below her. It's justified in the text that she wanted to make a point about people being used against her, on top of her belief in leading through fear.
Let it be fear.
While I believe in the fear she evokes, I don't believe in her belief in her fear. I don't buy the pain that has led her to this moment. I don't buy the personality that has taken over. I simply don't buy it. Battles are the payoffs in stories. They're when all the character work we've witnessed up until this point blossoms, and the character can become their pure self. It's where tensions that have been building up between characters for ages are finally confronted and resolved. Battles are both their own self-contained stories and the final piece to a vast puzzle. If you look at every great Game of Thrones battle, you will see that they have whole seasons getting their characters into the right spot, both emotionally and geographically. I was actually a big fan of the first half of Season 7, and the high point of that season was the battle in its 4th episode, The Spoils of War. So much of how that battle works exists in the episodes that came before. How Daenerys tries to win the war peacefully, but is outmaneuvered by Euron and Jaime. How she is cut off from key allies, forcing her to act before her enemies seize essential resources. The counsel of her hand fails her, so instead she trusts in the words of the late Olenna.
You're a dragon. Be a dragon.
There's a clear causality of the decisions and influences leading her to this point. Her desperation forces her hand, to which she comes with full force. The battle mostly keeps to Jaime for maximum impact, but it still follows Daenerys during key moments in the air. Emilia Clarke is a phenomenal performer. For God's sake, let her act. Keeping her away from the bells makes the ground stuff more terrifying, but it robs the battle of its most critical drama. Once you realize how little the battle follows Daenerys, you see how much it just doesn't work. The Bells doesn't tell its own self-contained story, nor does it piece together the rest of the season. It's only just really effective. The cynical reading of this battle is that they designed it for maximum visceral spectacle and just hoped that would carry the load. It's really only paying off the setup done in The Last of the Starks, which on its own is the most rushed and contrived episode in the show's history. If any moment in the show needed proper build-up, it was this one. Maybe that's the big takeaway from the final season of Game of Thrones. The Long Night and the Bells are the grandest episodes of television of all time. They are working on a scale and production that most fantasy properties could only dream of. They are bold in their vision, from the use of music to the production design and stunt work that bring these battles to life. The entire cast brings their A-game, selling the terror at their lows and the heroism during their highs. These battles go beyond what is possible in large-scale fantasy. But they don't tell a coherent story. And nothing is more powerful than a good story.